The U.S. bishops have a fall meeting, and they're getting very political. And why are young people coming back to the faith? And a scandal erupts in New York City. The Prayerful Posse will explore it all next. Stay there. Welcome to an important Prayerful Posse. Be sure to subscribe to the show. It's a wonderful way to support our work, totally free, or go to RaymondArroyo.com. Let's convene the Prayerful Posse. Canon, lawyer, and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. The whole gang's here. Gents, last week we examined the Holy Father urging the bishops to speak with one voice on immigration policy. Well, this week, the United States bishops at their fall meeting answered the call. Never say we aren't prescient. Bishop Mark Seitz of El Paso, who's the chairman of the Migration Committee, encouraged the bishops to support the migrant community affected by U.S. immigration policy under President Trump. The committee's working on a national initiative titled, "You Are Not Alone." Okay, here's what he said.
Since January, the Trump administration has remained committed to carrying out the president's campaign promise of mass deportations. This has been accompanied by policy changes that are intimidating and dehumanizing the immigrants in our midst, regardless of how they came to be here. As our late Holy Father, Pope Francis, so often reminded us, and as Pope Leo has strongly reiterated in these months of his papacy, acts of accompaniment are vitally important and integral to our shared mission of bringing hope and truth to a world desperately in need.
Father, what do you make of Seitz' comments there, particularly that mention of deportations being intimidating and dehumanizing to immigrants?
Well, I reject the premise. I do not think it is dehumanizing to enforce law because you're recognizing that the person who has violated the law is a rational actor who made a decision at one point to enter the country illegally or to overstay a visa, and always doing that with the knowledge that this was something that was illegal. So if the law enforcement agent approaches them, they should admit their fault and then, comply with whatever is required. Self-deportation has been offered by this administration to people. Many have taken advantage of it. And, I think of the analogy. Let's say about 300 people decided they wanted to live in the USCCB headquarters and brought mattresses and all the rest and their luggage and said, we're moving in and we're going to stay here. Would the bishops' conference say, well, we have to let them stay. We can't call the police and evict them because they're coming in here illegally? They would never allow 300 people to take up residence in their headquarters. So by analogy, the whole country has a right to a similar policy. Yeah, legal immigration, one of the strengths of this country. We all come from immigrant stock in our genealogical background. It's a great thing, but it has to be legal. Illegal immigration is not right.
A while back, a man I didn't know showed up at my front door. He'd found my address online and he wanted me to deliver a letter to someone he'd seen on one of my shows. My family was inside. And that's when I started taking our digital safety seriously, because the threat doesn't end at the doorstep. For too many seniors and families, the bigger danger isn't someone finding you, it's someone becoming you. Rerouting a Social Security deposit, opening credit in your name, filing a fake tax return, even sticking you with medical bills using your Medicare details. Most people discover it when the bank or collectors call. How does it happen? Data brokers build and sell dossiers on you, your name, your address, phone, income, even your family ties to anyone willing to pay. They don't vet the buyer. Scammers, spammers, stalkers, they all get through. That's why today's sponsor is Aura. Aura finds where your personal information is being sold. It removes it and keeps it off automatically. More than removals, it's a one-stop shop for online protection. dark web alerts, real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, continuous monitoring, a secure VPN, antivirus, a password manager, and U.S.-based support around the clock. For parents and grandparents, Aura's parental controls connect your kids' devices to your app, so you can see exactly what your kids are seeing and block harmful content. Safety for every generation. For our Arroyo Grande audience, start your 14-day free trial at Aura.com. That's AURA.com/Raymond Arroyo. Or scan the code. There's nothing more important than protecting your loved ones, and Aura does just that. Bob, you know, if immigrants or anybody else wanted to occupy the USCCB headquarters, Father, as we learned during their budget discussion at this meeting, half the building is empty, and they're looking for $4 million to make up the difference. So, you know, they could charge rent. That's a possibility. But Bob, at the meeting, at the fall meeting, during the presentation of a rather emotional 4-minute video that Bishop Seitz played, it featured testimonials by immigrants who felt traumatized, and you know, there were tears, and it's very emotional. The same presentation shown to Pope Leo, you'll remember, several weeks ago, that caused him to reportedly be visibly moved. And after playing the video, the bishop had this to say.
Allow me to state the obvious. Our immigrant brothers and sisters, from those who are undocumented to those who are naturalized citizens, are living in a deep state of fear. Many are too afraid to work, send their children to school, or avail themselves of the sacraments. And even those who continue to participate in daily life do so with a dark cloud hanging over them.
Bob, what do you make of this political and emotional messaging and the lack of distinction between those who are here legally and those who aren't?
Yeah, I think this is rather typical of the bishops, and has been for a while. It goes back, I think, at least 10 or 15 years. I was actually invited to speak to a committee of the bishops about 10 years ago, who were looking to join hands with more traditional Catholics to find out, you know, how can we present our case, their case about immigration. And I remember saying to them at the time that, you know, you downplay the seriousness of the legal question here. And one bishop, this was an auxiliary bishop from a diocese that I won't mention, said, well, you know, what you're talking about is like jaywalking. It's not all that serious a business, and so therefore our people are integrating. And I said to him, well, wait a minute. This is a great deal more serious than that. This involves national sovereignty, all sorts of different questions. It's not just jaywalking. There are all kinds of other elements that are involved here. No, that said, sometimes police actions like this are pretty ugly. I mean, when police have to go pick up a criminal, somebody's broken the law, it sometimes isn't very nice. And you can put together a bunch of clips to make it clear that that's the case. But just because there are some violations of what should be the proper procedure doesn't discredit the actual fact of what the police are doing, or what the Border Patrol does, or what ICE is doing. And you know, I've got to say that the church in general is behind the curve on this one. We are not in a world that is going to be a world of open borders. It's created enormous problems that the church has not recognized, but that many people in many countries are beginning to recognize at a political level. I think that they're going to have to come to terms with this very soon, and the sooner the better, because it's not going to be a pretty picture if it goes on the way it's been going.
Well, they don't seem to be getting the message at all. This new statement, in fact, at Bishop Supich's, Cardinal Supich's urging, condemns what he calls indiscriminate deportations, and they added a thing about with no regard for due process. Well, if somebody has a visa overstay, Father, and is in violation of U.S. code, they can be legally deported. And the one thing you never hear, which I think actually would help the bishop's argument and help them reach more people, is about the criminality and abuse of the American system by these cartels and the utter lack of human dignity that are endured by those who are trafficked here.
No, it's correct. I mean, it's as Bob says, this is an emotional presentation, and it's designed to get people to say, "Oh, just keep the police at home. Don't arrest anybody. Can't we all just get along?" And the answer is, if you want that policy, convince Congress to repeal all laws regulating entry into the country. And the last election showed the people don't want that. The Biden administration led an unsupervised inflow of people that cartels took advantage of to traffic people in here for prostitution, drug distribution, and other things. We have these gangs from different Latin American countries who came in here to be part of criminal enterprises. This is what happens when you have a system in which the law is ignored. And this is therefore in need, we would call this in Wall Street a correction. Things are getting back to what they're supposed to be. Now, do we love immigrants, illegal and legal? Of course we do. The church, so illegal aliens who are present here have every right to be taken care of by Catholic charities, to have pastoral services. I would object if it's true that ICE is not letting priests get into facilities to hear confessions and say Mass and communion. That's all should be regulated. But the idea that someone who violates our law has a right to stay here and not be arrested, that's a revolutionary idea. And if the Catholic Church wants to pursue that, okay, hire the lawyers, station them, at the ICE facilities and try to get them to court. But these people have already had a process which judged them that they needed to be evicted. ICE knows who these people are, and they're going after them because they're already in the system. So this is not the way that the Catholic Church should be advocating. It should advocate for greater legal immigration. That's what we need. More people coming in legally.
And look, I love that they're saying everyone should be afforded human dignity. Obviously, everyone should, and that is a wonderful position for the church. I do worry when the church starts leaning, though, into immigration policy and characterizing in one direction these deportations with no mention of what drove it. I mean, President Trump went out and he ran on deporting illegal immigrants, and he won. So it isn't like it was a secret. This is what the American people wanted, and it comports with American law. Bob, this is from the City Journal. I'm going to read you this full excerpt because it may explain this corporate advocacy we're seeing coming from the Bishops' Conference, and as we reported last week, really coming from Rome as well. Total federal grants and contributions made to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and its affiliate organizations for refugee assistance programs rose from $14.6 million under the first Trump administration in 2019 to $122.6 million in 2022, according to audited financial statements. In just 3 years under Biden, those grants totaled more than $200 million. One signature federal program, Preferred Communities, tries to integrate immigrants into local communities. In 2023, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops was the top recipient of those grants, garnering $66.5 million. Reports open the books. Over 3 years, Catholic groups received more than $110 million from this program alone. Bob, Catholic Charities received something like $2 billion in 2023 in that 1 year. How much of this immigrant advocacy is driven by the loss of these federal grants, which we have to say floated the USCCB bureaucracy?
Well, look, I wouldn't overemphasize this. I mean, it's clear that this plays a role. I mean, there are lots of agencies, of course, that send back information to the Washington headquarters here, and between one thing and another, no doubt it exerts some pressure on the Bishops' Conference as an institution, as a conference. And I would just add, though, that there really is throughout our bishops. I don't know how deep this runs, but there is a kind of a generalized sense, and I don't know where this comes from, that somehow enforcing immigration law is immoral. We've got a new vice president and vice president of the Bishops' Conference. Archbishop Coakley is the president, very good man, but he's in favor of accompanying the illegal immigrants. And then Bishop Flores, who's now the new vice president, said in 2017 that arresting illegals was a material cooperation in an intrinsic evil. He compared it to driving someone to an abortion clinic for an abortion. Now, you know, he's a very intelligent man. He's a PhD in theology. He's a very intelligent man. Somehow these people, I think, have been mesmerized by this idea of accompanying the stranger, because it is not an evil in se, a malum in se that we say in theology. Abortion is an evil in itself.
Right.
Arresting somebody who is an illegal immigrant to the United States is not an evil in itself. In fact, it might be a good in itself, depending on the circumstances. And people who are carrying that out, ICE or whatever law enforcement agencies, may be actually doing a good thing for the community.
Yeah.
So look, this runs deep. It's a combination, I suppose, of money and I think a distorted view of Catholic morals that have given us this witch's brew that has to be examined more carefully. It needs to be examined here, and I think Rome needs to come to terms with this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, look, you're seeing this in Europe, too. Europe is saying, wait a minute, maybe we allowed too much of this unfettered illegal immigration, and now we're seeing the cultural clash that Benedict XVI warned was upon us and was happening in Europe, and that he was urging, you'll remember, back in 2008, 2007, that Europe needed to rediscover its roots, its Christian roots, and now you see them being imperiled. Father, is it time for the bishops to get out of the relocation business? I mean, for years, they've basically been paid by the federal government to relocate illegal and legal immigrants and refugees all across the country.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a dilemma because, I mean, let's look at it from what it is. The Biden administration had a policy of allowing people to enter the country illegally. In other words, they didn't have a visa, but they let them in, and they gave them a document which said you have to appear at immigration court, and that could be 5 to 10 years later. So in other words, it was a de facto waiving them into the country and granting them a temporary status. So once they're in government control, the government decided we're not going to spend money ourselves and build housing and social services and all that. It's not going to be a federal responsibility. We're going to pawn it or pawn it. We're going to franchise it out to private groups, including the Catholic Church. Now, by the way, why can't they franchise out educational vouchers in the same way, okay? So American citizens who want to send their kids to non-public schools could do that. So it's okay to send illegal aliens to Catholic facilities for resettlement, but it's not okay to use federal dollars to help pay poor kids who want to go to a Catholic school. That's just an aside. But in other words, the Catholic Church is doing a good, I'm not going to criticize people who were involved in resettlement services because they were acting according to the law for a laudable motive, which is to help people who are poor, need adjustment, and language and all the rest. But the question for the American citizens was, do we want to keep doing this?
Yeah.
And the American people said no. That was big part of the election. And I don't think that bishops should turn around and tell the American people, no, Trump is wrong. These people have a right to stay, and it doesn't matter that they came in illegally. It does matter. If law doesn't matter, then we might as well just basically live in bunkers, because if there's no law, then it's a free-for-all in society. We don't operate that way. The American people don't want that. The Catholic Church doesn't want that. I mean, if somebody, like the analogy I said about coming into the headquarters, if people got in there and took up residence, of course the bishops are going to call the police. They're not going to want to go confront who knows who living in their building illegally. So we all live by law. We have to. If you don't like the law, work to change. That's a great thing in the free society. You don't like laws, you elect people to change it. That's how we should operate.
But I worry in the effort to accompany anyone who wants to come into the country, and Bishop Seitz mentioned Afghanis and Nigerians and people from all over the world, in an effort to want to accompany them, when do you accompany the American citizens, the people in your pews, and law enforcement who are risking their lives to protect that law and execute it?
Yeah, well, I'll just jump back in again. The federal government needs to be out of our lives about directing so many things. They shouldn't allow illegal aliens in. That's what the Trump administration is doing. We shouldn't get involved in the police actions and try to stop them because they're acting legally. And then why don't we reduce taxes so people can afford to do the things they want to? I mean, it's so annoying to see that Catholic schools are closing right and left in this country because of inflation and other associated costs. This isn't how the society should operate. We should favor private initiatives that benefit the citizenry.
Yeah. As is customary at these annual, the fall meeting at least of the USCCB, the papal nuncio, who is the Pope's representative in the United States, he made a statement to the bishops of the U.S. at the start of this gathering. Cardinal Christophe Pierre, Bob, urged the body to remain faithful to Pope Francis's pastoral path and to the vision of the Second Vatican Council. The nuncio talked a lot about the late Pope Francis and his vision. Your thoughts, Bob, on the heavy focus on the previous pontificate. He also said something about the Vatican II is the key to any revolution, any updates that will happen in the future, the path of the church going forward.
Yeah, I have to say I was really quite surprised by this discourse that he gave to the bishops, because when you try to understand what somebody is saying, one of the better ways to do that is who do they think their audience is, and what do they think that audience most needs to hear. And so our American bishops, who by and large are Orthodox men, they're still largely in the line of John Paul II and Benedict, which is why they elected Archbishop Coakley. Clearly, he felt they needed to hear that Francis's vision should continue. And no doubt he checked that with Rome, and Rome said, yeah, go ahead with that. But the thing that was even more amazing was the way he kept going back and back to Vatican II, and as if Vatican II had predicted the moment that we're in right now, this change of moment that it anticipated and the rest of the world had not. Well, in fact, there's been so much debate over what Vatican II meant. Yeah. This is why they need to keep going back to this idea of the spirit of Vatican II, because the documents don't seem to say what the spirit allegedly is saying. Right. And what we have right now is something that I think is much different than that particular reading of Vatican II going all the way back to shortly after it closed. We are really in a different world, but it's not the one that points back to this kind of open world in which we're supposed to build bridges and not fences. I think it's time to start building some fences. And not only in the secular world, but in the church as well. We need to get back to the point where we have a clear definition of what it is to be inside the church and outside the church, what actually belongs to the faith and doesn't belong to the faith. Look, it will change things that happen. Some people will leave, some people will be attracted, but the church can only continue to exist if it has that sort of clarity about what it is, and what it is cannot simply be a kind of a more pious version of what's going in the secular world.
Bob, wow. It's time for the church to build fences. Bob Royal. I'm putting that on my bumper sticker. Father,
that's a patented saying from now on.
It's a great line. Father, it does speak to this confusion. I mean, I don't know why they keep talking about the spirit of Vatican II. Since Vatican II, we have less people in the pews, less people ordained, less people baptized, less people returning to the sacraments, and as Bob referenced, a general confusion about the essences and foundational beliefs of the faith.
Well, that confusion is why St. John Paul II issued the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So if the nuncio wants people to go back to Vatican II and understand it in the contemporary scene, well, John Paul II was at Vatican II. He said we need a catechism. The bishops of the world agreed. He issued the catechism. It was one of the most important documents that was issued in the post-conciliar period. And what was it? It's exactly what Bob is saying. It was establishing, this is what we believe, this is what we don't believe. This is why we believe it. This is why we don't believe these other things. I was distressed because to identify Pope Francis's policies with Vatican II forgets that, in fact, Pope Francis contradicted Vatican II in a few things. The Synod of Bishops was established by the Second Vatican Council. It never said that lay people should be added as voting members. That's what Pope Francis did. Vatican II never said you should bless same-sex couples, which is what Pope Francis did. Vatican II never said that people divorced and remarried should receive Holy Communion. That's what Pope Francis did. Vatican II never said that God willed all religions. That's what Pope Francis signed a document stating it, and then he said later he meant God's passive will, but still he's identifying the will of God with the existence of non-Christian religions. We believe that Jesus Christ fulfilled the promise made to Israel and that there's one faith based precisely on the revelation God made through Christ. We don't accept Buddhism and other religions as being alternate, valuable ways that God wants people to act. No, God wants people to be converted, come to the Catholic religion. So, I think what the nuncio was trying to say is, and I'm sure this was, of course, approved by the Roman authorities, which is the American hierarchy's not shown enough enthusiasm for the heritage of Pope Francis. They better get in line, because otherwise we're going to accuse them of being unfaithful to the Second Vatican Council, to which I would say, Eminence, here's the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Show me where the things that Pope Francis innovated are in that book, because they're not.
Wow. We're going to move on because this is something we've been covering for weeks, and it speaks to this battle over the traditional liturgy and even traditional practices across the United States. The Diocese of Charlotte, once again, Bishop Michael Martin announced he will ban the use of all altar rails for the reception of Holy Communion in his diocese, beginning the first Sunday of Advent. Father, I'll start with you on this again. Can a bishop do this canonically? I thought the faithful couldn't be kept from kneeling if they wish to receive that way.
Well, a couple of precisions. First is, we know about this because one of the pastors made an announcement about this decree coming. The decree has not been published. So as a canon lawyer, I say I won't comment on a diocesan legislation unless I read it. But let's presume that it's accurate. The bishop is not forbidding people to kneel for communion. He's simply not allowing them to have something to kneel down at, an altar rail or a prie-dieu. It is, you could say, I think you make canonical case, the bishop has the right as the local ordinary to regulate the arrangement of his churches. In other words, the liturgical appointments. He has a right to do it. But that right is also can be contested once the decree is issued by lay people saying, you're depriving us of the right to receive communion kneeling in a way that is convenient for us. I mean, think about an 80-year-old grandma who wants to receive communion kneeling, and now you're telling her, the altar rail can't be used, so we're going to go in the middle aisle, and you got to kneel down on the ground.
Find your way to the floor, Granny.
What kind of charity is that? And I think it's certainly not the mind of the legislator. Now, let's get back also to reality. Has any pope ever said that altar rails are a bad thing and need to be removed? Never. My goodness.
This is what I say.
So incredible.
Why are we wasting time with this stuff? Okay, why are they wasting time with the ink to write this kind of mandate and directive? It makes no sense to me. Bob, meanwhile, in an almost comical counter story, okay, in Germany, a priest conducted a Halloween service dressed in a Dracula costume, complete with artificial fog, and he emerged from a coffin. There he is. Bob, why are these bishops so worried about tradition and grandma and 20 and 18-year-old kids kneeling when this nonsense is going on?
It's because they need to build more walls, Raymond. Bridges. I've already
Keep on theme. Keep on theme, Bob.
Altar rail is kind of a wall. Actually on that one, just to start there for a second, this really is an attempt to erase the difference between the profane and the sacred. There's always been a kind of a sacred space in the ancient temple in Israel and in most religions. And this really, I see this, we've talked about this before, but I really see this as like an attempt to make us, the mass is just kind of all of us getting together and, having a nice time together. I mean, one of the things people try to do is to go back and figure out what was the original Last Supper like? Well, whatever it was, the apostles weren't standing in line and receiving communion. We know we can say that for sure.
Yeah.
But look, these two things are related. You're quite right, because in one way we're breaking down the idea of the sacred, of some sacred space. In some of the legitimate Catholic rites, like in the Eastern Byzantine rites, there actually is a screen,
right,
an iconographic screen between the altar and the people. And I think it's one thing for a bishop to go out on a limb like this. I really wish our bishops would get together about it. It's not a good thing for a bishops' conference to have to decide things like this. But certainly in the United States, we should have some kind of uniform acceptance of maybe a couple of different things that you can do. But a guy popping out of a coffin, I think if I were the bishop of that diocese, I would have had, some medics right after that rite to pick him up and take him to some place and get him some help. Because, I mean, what in the world how does this happen in the one Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church?
I don't know. Did you see those pictures, Father, of the guy in the Dracula getup?
Yeah, I did. And for me, this is a symbol of what the Catholic Church has done in Germany, which is they've rejected revealed religion and enter the popularity contest to get views on the internet. This is like the priest I saw recently who dressed up in a rapper's outfit, with the heavy gold, fake gold chain and the hat and the glasses. And he was rapping during Mass. In other words, rhymed poetry.
Statt bling bling lebt mancher seinen Glauben mehr im Stillen. Doch heut wird es laut und dieser Beat verkündet allen.
This is absurd. And you know what it reveals too is a theological poverty, that the act of worship is essentially an entertainment forum, and people no longer like the old entertainment we gave them when we had Mass. So now what we're going to do is we're going to substitute it with other things. And you just say to yourself, Father, did Jesus Christ come down into the world so that his priests would be a B-level version of Dracula movies? Of course not. This is absurd. This is sad, and the spiritual rot in Germany is so deep when these kind of things happen. And then Bob says the guy needs a medic. Maybe he does, or maybe he simply needs a bishop who says, no, we're here to promote religion, not entertainment.
Yeah.
Or an exorcism.
Well, maybe that too. Yeah. And Father, don't insult Dracula movies. I had Bela Lugosi's granddaughter on a few weeks ago. Bela Lugosi was a faithful Catholic who served Blessed Karl during the war at Mass. So, sometimes Dracula is more orthodox than some of these people.
Hold on, Raymond. I love Dracula movies. I love Frankenstein movies. But the thing is that's not what church is all about.
Right. You don't want him offering the sacraments. I agree. Okay. Some possible good news, Bob. You flagged this for us. Pope Leo has announced a special consistory of cardinals at the top of January. We don't have details on why they're meeting, but first of all, Bob, what is a consistory of cardinals? A lot of people hear that term. They don't know what you're talking about. And why is this different from Pope Francis?
Well, I mean, broadly speaking, a consistory is the cardinals who are kind of advisors to the Holy Father, at least in theory, ideally, They come together in Rome, he gathers them together in Rome, and they get to sit down and talk through some questions with one another. It was a strange thing about the papacy of Pope Francis that he, after the first, I think it was only a first consistory that he had where Cardinal Casper spoke about what became kind of the Amoris Laetitia line of some people being able to receive Holy Communion who were divorced without having an annulment. And I think after the disappointment that the cardinals didn't get together behind Cardinal Casper and along with Pope Francis didn't really convene consistories like that again.
Right.
And the criticism was often made, and we made it, the three of us made it many times, is that what that did is that the cardinals didn't really know one another. They didn't get a chance as a body to advise the Pope very much. And so this is a departure. As much as Leo has talked about wanting to follow in the line of Pope Francis, one of his first official acts, and this year, as we said, this is a Jubilee year, so his schedule is chock-a-block with one event after another that's been scheduled for years. And so, I mean, in the first week after the Jubilee year ends, he's got scheduled to try to get all the cardinals, as many as possible, from around the world to Rome with him to talk about what we don't know, as you rightly say. But already, just to bring them together and to consult with them, that's kind of a synodal church that I could applaud.
Father, it is interesting. And my thought when I read it and read the several reports where this is covered, it did seem to me this may be the actual beginning of Pope Leo's reign, where he begins to, for the first time, sort of be his own man without the specter of Pope Francis that has really covered him throughout this Jubilee year that, as Bob said, was already largely set in motion. The man is kind of walking through the steps that we might have seen Pope Francis walk through.
Well, we'll find out. You know, I can say that he didn't observe Pope Francis's dress manner of dressing. He's done a lot more of the formalities of John Paul II and Benedict. So he can declare himself when he wants to. He's also taken days off, which Pope Francis never did. Just a little. The Pope Francis had a couple more consistories, and at the last one, though, you weren't allowed to approach the mic and speak on your own. You had to be called, and you had to submit your comments ahead of time, and it was very controlled. In fact, it was stage managed, so to say. So my first thing is to find out: will the Cardinals get an open mic and more than 2 minutes to speak? If they're given 5 minutes to speak, then we're going to have some serious conversation. You know, I mean, if you can do a podcast of 40 minutes with 3 guys, why can't the Cardinals do something similar? You know, designate someone to represent different groups from different languages or peoples, whatever. But the real thing for me is going to be: is this going to be a rah-rah session to say everything Pope Francis did we have to endorse, or will this be a truly, candid and realistic assessment of where the Catholic Church is today? Because we have open rebellion in the Catholic Church, particularly on moral and doctrinal questions, that cannot be allowed to go unaddressed. Because if they're not addressed, we're going to have more chaos. And this is particularly in matters of sexuality, the ordination of women, and then the whole question of, do lay people share in governance in the church? Which is now, we have women and lay people being given roles in the Roman Curia, which never were given before. And this is all part of Pope Francis's vision of accompaniment, which means everybody has a say in how the church is governed. That has to be addressed.
Okay, for the record, Bob Royal, it's time to build walls. Father Gerald Murray, open mic night for the Cardinals. I got it. I'm going to I'm creating these bumper stickers. I'm going to sell them everywhere. Okay, in perhaps another sign of hope, Millennials and Gen Zers, we learn, are now more likely to attend church than their parents, according to new research released by Barna, the Barna Group. These findings show a marked reversal of decades-long trends where we saw younger folks leaving church attendance behind. Millennials and members of Gen Z have now overtaken boomers and elders as the most frequent churchgoers. According to Barna's stats, the average Gen Z Christian now attends services 1.9 weekends per month. Millennials, 1.8 times, a steady increase for both groups since the pandemic. Father, why are we seeing this? What is driving it? And are you seeing this in your own parish?
Well, I would, when I see these statistics, I do wonder, because yes, I do see young people coming to church, but not in the numbers I remember when I was a kid back in the 1960s and 70s. So, just the attendance statistics are taken every year in all the dioceses of the country. So we know who's going to church, who isn't. Now the surveys, I haven't done this, study about their methodology, but I will say this: as the Charlie Kirk murder and subsequent things have revealed, young people are hungry for truth and authenticity. They're tired of the fake woke movement in this country. They're tired of, the religion of balloons and cake. They want something that's going to address questions of sin, salvation, how do I live a happy life? So I'm not surprised that that's happening. But the question is, are we offering the authentic Catholic version of life to them, or are we going to be simply going along and saying, don't worry of what you're doing in life. God's the God of accompaniment. The word is conversion. The word is adhesion or coherence. That's what we need to teach, not walk with us and we'll smile at each other.
Yeah. Bob, anything to add there about why these young people are coming forward and what they're seeking?
Well, I think it's probably several different things. I wouldn't put too much energy behind this thinking that we've got a sea change coming. Maybe we do, and I hope we do. But these things kind of go cyclical. I know we all remember back in the 1980s, there was a Catholic moment, according to our friend Richard John Newhouse. And there was a bump up in Catholicism
Yep.
at the time, and then it kind of faded away in the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, these are good signs. Father, I think, is exactly right that the deepest motivation probably is these are kids who haven't. There's nothing even for them to rebel against. They haven't even
Yeah.
seen a church that's a substantial church, and so when they do come in contact with it, and it's something different from the lack of substance that exists in the society as a whole. I mean, I look back at Jordan Peterson. Why was Jordan Peterson, so effective? I mean, he's brilliant, obviously. He knew how to speak to young people, but it wasn't only that. He presented them with something solid. Get up in the morning, put your shoulders back, don't slouch around. Shake hands with people. Look them in the eye. I mean, engage the world. Be a human being in the world.
This is what we've talked about for years, and it's a pity. And look, I travel a lot. I was just in Nashville. I was just in Texas. I was just out in California. When you see the young people pouring and packing into these churches, they're going to traditional services. They're looking for traditional, solid structure, Bob. That's what Jordan Peterson gave them, structure. And I hate to say it, this is the rigidity that Pope Francis tried to drive out of Catholic worship. This is exactly what the young people are looking for. They're looking for something solid and a form and a structure in a world of chaos and fluidity. And I don't know why we're removing the foundations and the structure that the biggest possible group of new Catholics are seriously craving, Father.
Well, I would add on this too. We've had a lot of new initiatives in the church, especially here in the United States. Eucharistic congresses, all sorts of things that have been developing. I talk to young people who are on secular campuses where their campus ministries are really, really very good.
Yep.
This is something different than existed in the past. So look, we wherever we are, we build up this little bit, and next thing you know, all of a sudden there's a wave of kind of conversions, a wave of young people coming into the church. I mean, we should never despair of the power of the Holy Spirit when the Holy Spirit is allowed to be presented to people like this. Yeah. They're hungry for something, and we might as well give them the best thing of all, which is the Eucharist and the faith that will not only help them in this life, but in eternity.
Yeah. Father, you want to add any last words on this topic?
I live in the land of Mayor-elect Mamdani, who was elected by the younger generation and a combination of other factors, including South Asian voters and the like. But I think we're seeing, we're seeing a different split in the country, which is where there's less influence of elite institutions such as Ivy League schools and the federal government. There's much more open spirit. I mean, Texas A&M, I hear, one of the best Catholic centers in the whole country, and they have lots and lots of kids going there. I think that's where the spirit of religion is appreciated and taken for, in the right sense. Yeah. But look, God is good. It only takes a couple of saints to revolutionize a diocese or a country. Yes. I mean, St. Charles Borromeo is still talked about in Milan, 5 centuries later, because he was a holy bishop. And, we have the same thing in our country, that we have people who are great. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is probably the only woman that every single American could recognize who she is if you said it. And she was a Catholic nun who took care of poor people in far distant India. So God acts in ways that are mysterious, thank God, because we mess it up all the time.
Well, and the Mamdani, the wave you've seen in New York, I'm going to argue, Father, hold me to this in a few years, that will create a cauldron of confusion and misery that's going to drive people into your parish and others like it. Watch. Just watch. It inevitably, when there's chaos and confusion, the church thrives, and persecution. And you might get all of that in New York City, I hate to say. Father, I need you both to weigh in on this. This week, an openly gay TV anchor is returning to the church after 25 years. He credits Pope Francis's legacy of inclusion and the outreach of Jesuit Father James Martin for his return. This is 38-year-old Gio Benitez, known from ABC's Good Morning America program, who's openly gay. He's married to a man, received the sacrament of confirmation at Manhattan's Church of St. Paul the Apostle, which is well known for its LGBTQ ministry. Father, your thoughts on this? What does canon law say about the reception of the sacraments in a case like this?
No, this is a scandalous event that should never have happened. Mr. Gio Benitez is in a so-called same-sex marriage, which means he either went to a religion that agrees with that, a Protestant church, or to a civil ceremony, and is now claiming that he's married to a man. Okay, that is an open rejection of Catholic doctrine about the nature of marriage. If he sincerely thinks he has a husband, then he is rebelling against the very faith he now claims he's returning to. In addition, the same-sex couple engages in sexual activity. That's the purpose of having that same-sex relationship. The church does not bless sodomy. This is quite clear. This is why Pope Francis's activity and saying you can bless same-sex couples was so scandalous and wrong. It needs to be stopped. Now we're having a situation in which priests, such as Father Martin and the priests at that parish, are saying, well, Pope Francis said we can bless couples, and, we have an inclusive view. This inclusive view is amnesia about what Jesus taught. Jesus did not endorse sodomy. It's condemned in the Bible. It's condemned in natural law. So someone who is publicly identifying themselves as engaging in that behavior and pretends he's married to a man, he cannot be confirmed in the Catholic Church because he is basically what we would say in canon law, publicly defiant against the faith. So this is a scandal. This is very, very wrong.
Bob, Bishop Joseph Strickland, who is a bishop emeritus, was at the bishops' conference this week. He got up in the middle of the conference and said, so long as we're talking about doctrine, I think we as a body need to talk about this event that took place in New York, the one we just described. And he thought it was scandalous. The bishops just ignored him. They just went on, thank you, Bishop, and moved on and continued with business. Your reaction to that and this story?
Poor Bishop Strickland. I mean, he was brave enough to stand up. I mean, he obviously is persona non grata in several quarters. Mm-hmm. But look at what this is. The bishops, I think a large number of our bishops in the United States, for all the problems that we know exist in the church, probably agreed with him. They aren't willing to stand up in public and say that they're supportive of him. And why? Well, they would have to cross swords with the Jesuits, who have authority over Father James Martin, who is a Jesuit priest. They would also have to implicitly be looking to Pope Leo, who met with Father Martin shortly after he was elected. And according to Father Martin, said, keep doing what you're doing. And what he's doing is creating confusion like this. And these are salami tactics. Every time there's a story like this that appears, it makes it look one more time like the church is moving in the direction of accepting homosexual activity, even though the highest authorities say, oh, no, that's not what we're doing. We're just accompanying people. We're not blessing couples. We're blessing individuals. Look, the world is understanding what the message is here. And I don't know how much longer this can go on. At some point, there's going to be an explosion. It will not get better. Ignoring it will not make it go away. And ignoring it will only make it turn it into a more and more difficult decision to make when it comes to a crisis point. And shame on our bishops. Shame on our bishops. They should do something, perhaps not even as a group, but they certainly were willing to stand up when Cardinal Cupich was willing to give an award to Senator Durbin in Illinois for his pro-immigration work. We need some kind of activity on the part of our bishops, public activity to say, no, this sort of thing cannot take place. This is not even something that Fiducia Supplicans says is okay. It actually violates what we're told Fiducia Supplicans allows. So look, it's not only scandalous. To me, this is a further step into a realm that is going to destroy whatever remains of the church's teaching about LGBT.
We've been hearing a lot about anti-Semitism in the news of late, given the controversy over Israel's war against Hamas, Tucker Carlson featuring Nick Fuentes on his show, and the 60th anniversary of the landmark Vatican II document Nostra Aetate. There was a Benedictine college history professor, Richard Crane, who said the following. He said it is a disturbing time to live in, not just because of the resurgence of anti-Semitism, but the extent to which this has poisoned at least elements of the Catholic faithful. Father, your thoughts on this alleged resurgence of anti-Semitism, particularly in Catholic circles. Do you see this?
After the Nazi killing of 7 million Jews, if we in the West are not conscious of the fact that there are people who want to do that again, then we are amnesiacs and moral cowards. We have to confront the group of people who hate Jews, want to wipe Israel off the map, and now we have the Islamic fanatics who join with the traditional anti-Semites and blame everything on the Jews. You know, look, I think, in fact, most Catholics are not anti-Semitic. I think Nick Fuentes is kind of a nut on the fringe, and I hope he changes his mind. But we should have nothing to do. The insinuation is also the conservative movement in the United States has always been anti-Semitic. It's now only coming to the surface. I reject that completely. And I don't think that Tucker Carlson did a good thing and others trying to defend him. This Nick Fuentes is a Nazi fanatical apologist. I don't accept that kind of person in any civil discourse.
Bob is a journalist and a writer and thinker on this scene for a long time. Your thoughts on the conflagration of hostility or upsetment over Israel's foreign policy decisions with anti-Semitism? We are seeing kind of a melding here.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, as many people have said, that once you put the two words together, the Jews, you're already in dangerous territory, as if every Jew is the same and it's all an international conspiracy or whatnot. Look, it's possible to criticize what Israel did in Gaza. I myself think that they have a right to defend themselves, and I myself feel that, although I'm a supporter of Israel, that they may have gone too far in certain ways, but it's not my decision. They know the threat that they're facing there. But the way that this demonic, slithering anti-Semitism has just come out of the sewer and hooked itself onto this debate about Israel, to me, is something diabolical. I mean, we have to begin from the point that we have as Catholics, we have an unshakable connection to Israel, the true Israel, because the true Israel is what gave us Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises to Israel, as Father said earlier in this show, and that we can't. A Catholic cannot be an anti-Semite. As I think it was Paul VI said, spiritually, we are all Semites. We are all part of that religion that began with Abraham and that continued through the Jewish people and now is embodied in the church itself. The church has become a kind of a fulfillment of the Jewish people. And so the way that this hooks onto conservatism is very, very strange. I mean, we all recall that it was Bill Buckley, the editor of National Review, who back in the 1950s and 60s, when some of this started to emerge, made very clear as a Catholic and as a conservative in America that this was not going to be part of the respectable right in the United States. And somehow it keeps coming back, and I think it's because it has an evil spiritual origin. We must stop it, and I don't know what motivated Tucker Carlson to give a platform to this young man who is so deeply, deeply disturbed and speaking evil.
I got to end with this, Father. The Church's highest trial court, the Roman Rota, has ruled in favor of an American priest who sued over the release of his name in a so-called credibly accused clergy list. In a November 9th article in La Repubblica, an unnamed priest successfully brought a claim for defamation before the Rota's tribunal under the norms of Canon 220 of the Code of Canon Law, which forbids, quote, the illegitimate harm of a person's good reputation. Father, what do those canons explicitly say? What's meant by illegitimate harm?
Yeah, well, this is a debated point in canon law because priests who are accused of a crime have a right to self-defense. They have a right that their good name not be impugned, meaning that the fact that the accusation has been given means that they are treated by the church as if they're guilty. But is an indictment in a civil court or a criminal court, is an indictment a harm to someone's reputation? You could say in one sense, maybe, but the whole legal system depends on the fact that we are now going to submit that person to a process in which he's given every opportunity to defend his name. And he doesn't have to prove his innocence. You know, the state has to prove his guilt. So in the Catholic Church, they had to say, rather than conduct trials so that people can be cleared of accusations, they simply say, well, this man has been accused and we're going to put the name out there. This has to often do with people who are dead. In other words, accusation against dead priests, and then they put them out there. Now, it's a difficult question because for me, if someone's indicted, that's not a harm to their reputation. If you want to live in a free system with a legal system, you have to submit to its claims. If you don't like it, get out of the country. But you're never going to find a better system, in my view, to combine the rights of people to be considered innocent and the rights of victims and the state to prosecute criminals and people who cause harm. So I'm waiting to see how this plays out because there is no legal standard for the definition. What does it mean to be credibly accused? I was never happy with that. I think it much be better to say, this man is now subject to a prosecution, and then don't leave that open. Finish the trial and then determine guilty or innocent. So, but this is, again, we talked about it a lot. Modern standards of justice are not in effect in canonical criminal procedures. They go on these ancient ways of doing things where everything's hidden and then the authority invents a term like credibly accused. No, that's not how it should be.
Okay, Posse, we will leave it there. Thank you both for your time. Grateful to you all as always. If you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande channel on YouTube or follow our podcast wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the Posse rides again, gang, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.